Hi, everyone. This is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect. You are joining us for another podcast, and this podcast is actually an excerpt from a recent web conference. This web conference that you're going to hear from is part of our series that we're doing in partnership with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center called Sexual Violence Prevention During the COVID-19 Pandemic Adapting in an Ever Changing Landscape. The web conference you're about to hear from is called Adapting Sexual Violence Prevention Curriculum During COVID 19. And we have another podcast that we've published too that goes over an earlier part of this web conference. But on this podcast, you are going to hear from Barry Rosenbluth and Meg Green of Safe Austin. They talk about the adaptations that they made to the Expect Respect curriculum. And then at the end of this podcast, you will also hear from Holly Briggs, Elizabeth Madrid, Cynthia Reinhard, Tiffany Kelly, and Stephanie Ox of REACH, formerly known as CASA in Riverside, California. They're also implementing Expect Respect, so they talk about a little bit of how that's been different in their California community.
Hello, everybody. I'm Barry Rosenbluth. I direct the Expect Respect program at the Safe Alliance in Austin, Texas. I have a new appreciation for utilities after the week we've just been through here. It was challenging, but I'm really happy to participate today and tell you our COVID story. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about SAFE. The Safe Alliance exists to end child abuse, domestic violence, sexual assault, and exploitation. We are a large multi-site organization that supports survivors throughout the Austin area and also works to create safer and more just communities. The Expect Respect program is predominantly school-based. We serve 50 plus schools each year with multiple components. And as you can see on this poster that we provide to our participating schools, we offer support groups for students who have any personal exposure or involvement in unhealthy, abusive relationships. They may have been exposed to violence at home, be direct victims themselves, maybe in abusive relationships, or beginning to perpetrate these behaviors towards peers and dating partners. The support groups are at school during the school day, typically, and I'll be telling you a little bit more about how we transition them to an online format. We also offer some individual counseling as needed for those students who don't want to be in group or don't have a group at their school. And so that is another service we have been able to provide remotely. Our educational theater program is phenomenal. You'll be hearing from Meg in just a few minutes about that. We also work with youth leaders on each campus to promote positive bystander behavior, but also to help them identify what are the issues that are important to them in terms of safety and social justice and creating a more responsive and supportive school environment. Okay, you can find out more about Expect Respect on our website. Please advance. So when schools shut down in March of 2020, these were our initial priorities. First and foremost, we wanted to stay connected with the youth who were already participating in all of our programming at the time. And our focus, we understood, would be about their immediate health and safety and well-being. We reached out to their families when it was safe to do so with school contacts, and offered information about support services, community resources, and then also offered ongoing connection through individual and support group, as well as our educational programs. We had a learning curve to get up to speed with how to do virtual programming, and we did a lot of exploration of different formats and tools, and had to practice and learn and adapt, and that was challenging, but we found that everybody was very patient and supportive, and we were all in it together, so that made it easier. One of the first things we wanted to do was develop a training for teachers on how they could be perhaps more trauma informed in their online spaces so that they could create a safe and responsive setting for students who were struggling so that they could offer connection to more support services as needed. We found that in our work with each other, we really relied on our team as we all individually dealt with personal and family issues, our anxieties, difficult conversations about racism and racial justice. And we were intent on doing our jobs, figuring out how to do our jobs in the new environment and keeping our jobs as we knew that that would be important as so many resources needed to also go toward crisis services. Next, please. This is a slide from our teacher training, which we were able to roll out to many faculties in the spring and fall semester, subsequent fall semester. The message primarily was to normalize the tough situations that students are experiencing in their homes as part of their online teaching, to specifically and intentionally invite students to reach out for help, to provide resources and contact information to everybody, not just those that they think needed help or those that asked for it, but to make it available to all students. Next. As summer approached, we turned our historically in-person Summer Youth Leadership Academy into a virtual workspace. This component of our program is a 5-week summer job in collaboration with our county summer work-based learning program. About 30 students participate each year, and they come to 2 different work sites, and they learn to be social justice advocates. This was our lab for becoming a virtual program. We one of the innovations I think that was really genius was a calendar with the Zoom links so that students at each site could just click on the link and be in the right place at the right time on the right day. We had guest speakers. We had a virtual tour of part of our community, and students were able to develop activism projects virtually. They worked in pairs, they worked in small groups, sometimes they were online, sometimes they were offline. And what we learned from their feedback is that they really appreciated the opportunity, one, to earn money during the quarantine, but also to socialize and have relationships with their peers during that summer program. Also, some of the facilitators noted that the participation on the virtual program was more balanced, whereas in person you have some students who are more shy and some that are more forthcoming, and they're kind of ranking each other in terms of their status. On Zoom, everybody had the same size box, which is how one facilitator put it. And so there was a much more equalized participation. It gave the more reserved students an opportunity to maybe a little more confidence in speaking up, and it helped others kind of sit back. So next, please. One of the things that we had to add to our virtual job program was some expectations about online workplace behavior, how to set up your workspace, how to ensure more privacy by wearing headphones, by finding a private place if possible, and what the expectations were for having your camera on, for having your mic on, and asking for support if you needed it. Next.
This is so great to hear about how you all continue to support youth in your leadership programs, not only in the moment, but to set up some of those career skills for later too. I think back to you know how would my experience, even in college, have been different if I were in college during the pandemic and needing to do an internship and all of this kind of stuff too? And I just think it's so important that you all maintain that connection and support with youth. And I know on your next few slides you'll talk a little bit more about more of the curriculum aspects of Expect Respect.
Yes. So with the new school year starting up in fall 2020, we initiated our school-based support groups again with existing and new students. But we did that using the platform Nearpod, which is a wonderful online learning platform that allows the teacher or facilitator to create interactive activities that students can participate in during the Zoom call. We translated our 24 session support group curriculum into 24 Nearpod presentations. And these are a lot of fun, and we've had a lot of success using them and training other sites to use them as well. So normally we take referrals for the support groups from school personnel or self-referrals. On the right here, you see a card that could be found in a counselor's office for students who might want to refer themselves to the program. But during the pandemic, we took a more general approach and just reached out with, are you having a tough time? And felt like anybody who's having a tough time is a good referral for our support groups. In addition to offering the separate sex groups that we typically provide in middle and high schools, we were able to add an LGBTQ option for students. And because the groups were remote and we could draw students from different campuses, so had a more robust group there. Normally, we serve kind of the most proximal geographic area to our agency in Austin, but during the pandemic, were able to serve schools in a wider area because of them being remote. And we were also able to combine students from different schools in the same group. The individual sessions continued as needed by phone, text, email. We became much more flexible in terms of brief check-ins or just responding to needs rather than having a set time or duration for a session. And then this also just happened to coincide with a replication study in Pittsburgh, led by Pittsburgh Children's Hospital and the University of Pittsburgh. And so the facilitators, who were graduate students at the University of Pittsburgh School of Social Work, had been collecting survey data and doing in-person groups. And now they shifted to really just trying to stay in touch with their clients, also to be support for their health and safety. And some of the surveys were adapted to include COVID-related questions. Next. This on the left is the cover slide for the first session. That's what the Nearpod slide looks like. And then on the right, you see the actual print curriculum manual for our secondary support group curriculum for grades 6 through 12. Next. And here are some examples of the slides, the Nearpod slides. So on the left, you see, a Jeopardy game. The capability of these slides is so interesting because you can play games, you can have a collaborate board. On the upper right here, you see a virtual reality slide in which students can do a 360-degree tour of a Greek island. So we incorporated all of these interesting tools into the lessons to make it more fun, interactive. You can embed video, images. All right, next.
This is such great information, Barry, and it makes me smile when you talk about the virtual date that students get to go on in Greece. That's just it's such it's such an inspirational idea of like the skills that we build to have safe, healthy, and fulfilling relationships with one another are skills that we can always be learning and growing, depending on whatever our context is. I also really appreciate some of the other interactive elements of Expect Respect, including educational theater. So I think now we want to invite Meg to come on and let us know about the educational theater program. And, obviously we weren't packing auditoriums with people in the last year, so we really want to know what the adaptations were here too.
Everyone. My name's Meg, and when the pandemic hit, I was in the last month of my maternity leave. And so this is like the maternity leave that never ended for me. And my students were in the middle of their annual tour of our one of our main programs, the Changing Lives Youth Theater Ensemble. And as you can see from this picture, this is what our normal life would look like. We would be in the springtime, we're out on the road. So we tour to schools all over Austin for middle school students, and we are in cafegimatoriums, and we are in person. We are asking large groups of people to gather. So when the pandemic hit and we had to shut down, we had to cancel our tour. So we had a lot of shifts happen pretty quickly. And so I'm going to go through some of these, and then I'm going to talk through them a little bit more in depth as we move through. So we have about 6 programs that use theater to prevent violence. So dating violence, sexual harassment, bullying, consent education, social justice. So these programs use theater, and they are created by young people. So it's all about young people creating programs and touring them to the community, or creating products for the community. So really quickly, we had to shift our weekly rehearsals to Zoom. So with our one of our main programs, Changing Lives, which is a collaboration with a local arts program in town called Creative Action, we really quickly shifted to Zoom. So we immediately shifted rehearsals to Zoom, and just we're trying to figure it out. This is like the longest I've ever sat in a desk, I think, in my career, because I am a theater artist. And so I'm used to being in a room, standing up, playing games on my feet. So we had some learning curve of figuring out, okay, I'm in this box, I'm in this chair, but what else? What else is there? How can I get out of my seat? How can I move around? What games can I play where I have to run around my space and gather things and come back? How can I still share story? How can I use breakout rooms? So a lot of adjusting to the Zoom life. We currently had a performance that was already going out into the community. And so we had to cancel that tour, and we worked to create kind of an Instagram performance. So my students had the task of taking the 5 main characters from our play, and they created kind of an Instagram-esque storyline that took our play and then told the story of that character, and thought about how can we engage audience virtually and ask them the same questions we would in person. Our play was about jealousy. So each character kind of explored what jealousy was happening in relationships, and what was the tipping point for jealousy moving into violence. So on our Instagram story, we've got those saved as highlights at the Changing Lives Youth Theater Ensemble Instagram. So that was one of our main projects in the spring. And then we actually took that entire play and transformed it to a Zoom play, because we were invited to perform at a virtual conference in Houston this fall, which was super exciting. And we were supposed to be there in real life, but we still got to do the conference keynote from the comfort of our very own computer screens. I'm going to talk about this one a little bit more on the next slide, but we collaborated with our in-house graphic designer at SAFE to adapt our interactive theater program for high school students. That program is called Where's Your Line? And that program is generally an hour and 15-minute, hour and a half class period, one time off workshop where we work with students using interactive theater moments in discussion, so in person. And we adapted that to a synchronous model where it's actually 2 sessions now. So the like happy accident of that was realizing that the capacity for that program had to be pruned down for the attention span of students. So it couldn't be more than an hour. And now we go in twice as opposed to that one time. So we get more time with them, which is really exciting. And then another adaptation we recruited a team of young people to run SAFE's TikTok. So SAFE really wanted, our agency was really excited about TikTok and wanted to dig in and explore that format. And our marketing and communications team decided to pay young people to create that content, which is really exciting, and a space for young people to have leadership in our actual content production. So I'm going to talk more and I'll show you some examples. And then we had a lot of right, because this happened in March, we had a lot of students who were graduating. So in May, we were losing 6 of our seniors. Great question, Beth. So we have stipends and funds built into the grants that we write for our programming. So for Changing Lives, that has been built into our funds for a while. And yes, our TikTok handle is right there at Safe ATX. I just pointed at my computer screen like I'm with you. If only. And our marketing and communications team were able to find some funds to pay very modest stipends for our young people. So we have 3 people on that team right now. And so we still wanted to have that space to do some virtual celebrations. So we did things like drove all around Austin with care packages that had snacks and fidgets and t-shirts and stickers and candles for our retreat, which we lit together and did a meditation, confetti poppers to celebrate the end of the year, handwritten notes. So things to try to bring us into the real, into the visceral, we're together, even though we're in this space, this divide. And we've done that several times, lots of driving, but really worth it to see their faces when they open their care package and they have things that they can use in our activities together, like art supplies or snacks. All right, next. Thank you. Okay, so this is what Where's Your Line looks like. You can see that the in-person version is actors acting. They are in a classroom working with young people, and then they have discussion with them. Our graphic designer was able to, he's an amazing comic book artist in his own life. And so he was able to work with us to create kind of a digital story that is voiced by the actors, but has this kind of dynamic storytelling that's still grounded in reality. So we made that adaptation in May to have it ready for the school year. All right, next. And so instead of our in-person discussions, we shifted again to using Nearpod and using Google Docs to have some of those dialogues. We still do the program synchronously on Zoom. We felt like it was just too important to have those discussions in person, especially with our content, to be able to see students when they have their cameras on for us and have those discussions together. So we shifted to these spaces and do things like breakout rooms where they can still have that discussion. And the happy accident of that adaptation is really that we found that students were still digging in and participating. And maybe some of those quiet students are stepping forward in new ways, which is really exciting. All right, next. And we talked a little bit about adapting performances to virtual spaces, but we've done several performances. You can see some screenshots here from those. And then we did a program actually focusing on young people's experiences with quarantine and what does it mean to be a teen in quarantine. You can see them there in their Zoom boxes kind of reacting to feeling constricted to space. Next. I know I'm at the end of my time, so I'm zooming. Okay, this is our TikTok. These are our brilliant TikTok creators, Katia, Liv, and Eva. And they are working with us through May to continue creating content. And we realized that we needed to move past just thinking about violence prevention and thinking about where students are right now. So there's a lot around mental health. There's a lot around self-care and taking care of our relationships and ourselves right now, as well as our violence prevention and social justice content. All right, next.
So this has been like the anticipated slide for so long.
I know, and now I'm like zooming.
No worries. I think not only is it great to be able to compensate youth and have them do content creation, I think TikTok, like all of our social media platforms, has an opportunity to enforce and spread harmful social norms, but having youth create content on TikTok for the purpose of preventing violence does so much for promoting positive norms that will prevent against violence. So I really, really appreciate this. As someone who's way too old to be on TikTok, I think it's so great to bring in folks to create the content to meet their peers where they're at. And I know you have some other lessons learned that you want to share with us about, this whole process of adapting all of these elements of Expect Respect.
Yeah, and a lot of these have already been covered by folks, so I'll just go over them and add our little spin. But our programs are really based in being on our feet in community with students, being together, and so variety and thinking about ways that we break it up. So activities, breakout rooms, we use Google Jamboard a ton, which is another free tool if you haven't used that yet. Thinking about spaces where we intentionally choose to turn our camera on and off so that we're not always expecting it to be on, but we can build that time and space into our lessons. Games where we get out of our seats, using music, taking breaks. So our flexibility, thinking about flexibility for us was thinking about what are ways that we can make it easier for young people to participate. Do we need, less meetings and shorter meetings? Do we need to do drop-in? And then considering everyone's really brought that up in the chat, this idea of privacy, confidentiality, thinking about how we can help them get around that, wearing headphones, the ways that we engage with them. Again, keeping things trauma informed, again, about self-care, connection, really emphasis on helping young people get through this time, as well as teaching our content and keeping our content relevant. So thinking about how right now everything is online. So how do our topics relate to the ways that they're engaging with each other on social media, online, virtually? And then our last thing was really being gentle with ourselves and our young people. So being really realistic in what we can do. Adaptations take a lot of work. Technology is hard. And sometimes things are we have reduced participation and it might look different, and that's okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Cynthia. I'm going to be providing the brief introduction for the empowerment team at REACH, formerly the Center Against Sexual Assault, or CASA. You'll hear both. We are a nonprofit organization located in Hemet, California, and we offer therapy, case management, and advocacy to vulnerable populations. Another part of what we do is provide the outreach to the youth in schools in our community, and it helps to promote prevention and protective factors such as healthy relationships. As you can see here, starting at the top with Holly, she's our wonderful program manager of campus-based services. And I also have the privilege of working with 3 other brilliant women as prevention specialists, Elizabeth, Tiffany, and Stephanie. Okay, if you could go to the next slide, please. So Barry and Meg have spoken to you about the Expect Respect curriculum, which has been absolutely phenomenal for us. We have been using it in our schools that we've been providing outreach to since 2014. And today we're going to be sharing a little bit about our experiences, and we wanted to touch on a few of the most common challenges we found many facilitators have been facing during virtual learning. We also want to be discussing integrating Nearpod and the Expect Respect curriculum through our examples. And lastly, we just basically have a typical outline to share as well. Okay, if you could switch, please. Thank you. As you can see on this slide, the way that we approached each opportunity we faced was by breaking it down into these manageable parts, which you're going to see over the next few slides. We began with a challenge, or the perceived barrier, our topic, so to speak, which you can see to the left, the initial difficulty. Then we narrowed down our question, the precise struggle we're trying to find the answer for. Finally, through experience, we were able to face this opportunity with specific adaptations. And in this case, the initial difficulty was that limited student engagement piece that I just saw flooding the chat. And our identified question, how can we engage the youth in the way that they're currently experiencing the world? Because really, this has never happened for any of us before. It's completely new. And just as everybody else had said before us, flexibility, that was our answer. That was our adaptation. So we asked ourselves, how can we meet them where they are now? What is it that they're doing? And what are the new ways that we have found to replace, they have found to replace the connection that they're lacking in person? We noticed that they were actively engaged in gaming and social media, which is probably not a surprise. And that's literally where they're located right now. It led us to focusing on the gamification of knowledge. And because of this realization, we realigned our teaching techniques with this virtual learning style. Our example, basically, we just researched free resources, both online, from social media, for this virtual style of engagement. And we were really able to integrate these ideas as part of our lessons, as If you check out Nearpod, you'll be able to see how wonderful and interactive it is while still holding dear to that expect respect curriculum. The answers were all there. We made it our goal to find them. So I'm going to hand it over to Tiffany now. She's going to be sharing challenges 2, 3, and 4.
Thank you, Cynthia. As she was saying, we definitely had to brainstorm through some pretty big challenges, as I'm sure all of you have as well. So our second challenge was that how do we maintain that confidentiality in this virtual space, especially if our participants were going to be at home with their parents and siblings. And so the question we had asked ourselves was how do we do that? And so we adapted this by verifying that a safe and confidential space was available. And again, being a little bit flexible if that wasn't always the case. Our example was we normalized the discussion about confidentiality at the beginning of each session. Referencing, are your headphones on? Is your camera on? Are you as a participant the only one who can see your screen? And we also collaborated with our participants via Nearpod on what they felt confidentiality would look like. And we realized that this gave them a lot of buy-in, and that way we kind of ensured that the space was kept that way. Next slide, please. Thank you. Our next challenge was, of course, participation. We had to kind of figure out how we were going to be able to build the rapport virtually. So we wanted to focus on how to encourage support among our members as well. In the first couple of sessions, we discussed what it would look like to feel safe in our virtual setting. And we used various methods of engagement to get this conversation going. So again, flexibility. We used the chat feature sometimes on Zoom. Sometimes we turned it off, which actually promoted more open conversation via mic, which was really nice. Another way that we were able to build a safe group with strong rapport was promoting anonymity in the responses on your pod. You can actually turn off the feature so that you don't know who is responding. And so we let all of our participants know that we as co-facilitators didn't know who was posting what. And that actually brought out more of a stronger and involved conversation. We also gave them the opportunity to encourage each other by liking and elaborating on the answers that we're giving. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our fourth challenge was creating a culture of respect, knowledge, and of course, fun. As co-facilitators, we had to kind of determine what we were going to do to mirror healthy behaviors and coping skills that we wanted to teach these students. And of course, how we were going to do that via computer. So the way that we adapted for this was, again, the use of Nearpod. We used the poll feature, the draw feature, and collaboration boards were kind of our top three. And as Cynthia said, we discovered that many of our participants enjoyed interactive games. So we used mood meters and the Jeopardy feature to encourage that level of engagement. So our example for this last challenge was participants came up with group guidelines that were centered around respect. And we also used icebreakers at the beginning of a session to open up discussion because we realized they wanted to kind of start off with something fun and more interactive instead of jumping straight into the lesson. So throughout each session, we also shared responsibilities as co-facilitators. So that was our way of modeling healthy and respectful behavior. And now I'm going to pass it off to Elizabeth.
All right, so we had developed just a general outline for you guys, especially if you're going to use Nearpod. We found that this was a pretty quick, straight to the point, I guess, outline for each session. So we always started with an icebreaker. So we always try to make sure it was fun and simple, something that the kids can do kind of pretty quickly. But we always tried to make sure that each icebreaker had focused on building that connection, not just with us, the facilitators, but amongst themselves as well as participants. And then we had a check-in, which always tied into the lesson plan. I'm sorry. So this, for example, every check-in would consist of a question. So, like anger, let's say we focus on anger for that week. So, we would ask questions about how they would cope with anger, or what do they typically feel when they're um, angry. So, that was a great way to kind of lead into the activity, which was always an expect, respect curriculum based activity. And so, we would always have a lesson discussion afterwards. And this just provided an opportunity for the students to reflect on the activity. So this gave them the chance to really process their thoughts and feelings about whatever the lesson was about. And then the final thing that we always focused on was creating a challenge. So typically was a question that kind of connected to the activity. So let's take the anger activity again, and or lesson plan. So we would ask them, what are healthy ways, or can you think of healthy ways um, to cope with anger? So let's say that somebody just yells or punches a wall. So we kind of go through, okay, what are healthy ways to cope? And then at the end of the session, we ask, so what are some healthy ways that you guys feel like you can kind of cope with your anger now? And that is all.
Thanks for listening. Follow along with other Prevent Connect podcasts at preventconnect.org/podcast.